The dusty road stretched endlessly into the horizon, flanked by dry, barren fields under the scorching Texas sun. In the distance, a white house stood alone, stark against the desolate landscape. It was a peculiar sight, almost too pristine, as if untouched by time or nature. Emily and her friends, Jake and Laura, were city dwellers seeking a weekend of adventure. They had rented the house on a whim, lured by the online listing promising a unique escape into the heart of Texas. As they approached, a sense of unease settled over them, but they dismissed it as nerves from the long drive. The house was even more peculiar up close. Its white paint gleamed unnaturally, and the windows, though clean, reflected nothing of the surrounding landscape. The front door creaked ominously as they entered, revealing a surprisingly modern interior. Everything was spotless, yet it felt eerily lifeless. "This place is amazing," Laura exclaimed, trying to shake off the strange vibe. Emily and Jake nodded, though less enthusiastically. The trio unpacked and settled in, eager to explore their temporary home. As night fell, the wind howled through the fields, creating an unsettling symphony. Emily couldn't sleep. She felt watched, as if the house itself was alive, observing her every move. She tried to brush it off, but the feeling lingered, growing stronger with each passing minute. Suddenly, a faint whisper echoed through the hallway. "Emily." It was soft, almost tender, but filled with an inexplicable dread. She bolted upright, her heart pounding. "Jake?" "Laura," she called out, but there was no response. Gathering her courage, Emily stepped into the hallway. The whisper came again, leading her towards the basement door, which was ajar. She hesitated, the darkness below seemed to pulse with malevolence. Yet, compelled by some unseen force, she descended the creaky stairs. The basement was cold and damp, filled with old furniture and dusty boxes. In the center of the room stood a mirror, its surface tarnished and cracked. As Emily approached, the whisper grew louder, more insistent. She looked into the mirror and gasped. Her reflection was not her own. Emily's reflection was twisted and grotesque. The eyes were sunken, the skin pale and cracked like old porcelain. The figure in the mirror raised a hand, and Emily's heart stopped as she saw her own hand mimic the motion. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The reflection smirked, a sinister gleam in its hollow eyes. "I am you," it replied, the voice cold and hollow. "And you are mine." Emily stumbled back, tripping over a box and landing hard on the cold basement floor. She scrambled to her feet and ran upstairs, slamming the basement door behind her. Her breathing was ragged, and she could feel the cold sweat dripping down her back. Jake and Laura were still asleep, unaware of the terror Emily had just experienced. She decided not to wake them, unsure of how to explain what she had seen. Instead, she sat in the living room, clutching a blanket and trying to calm her racing heart. The next morning, the sun rose, casting a warm glow over the house. Emily felt a brief moment of relief, believing the nightmare was over. She decided not to mention the incident to her friends, hoping to forget the whole ordeal. The day was spent exploring the nearby town and enjoying the Texan countryside. However, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, lurking in the shadows. That evening, as they gathered around the dining table, a sudden knock at the door startled them. Jake opened it to find an elderly man, his face weathered and lined with age. His eyes held a mixture of fear and sorrow. "You need to leave," he said urgently. "This house, it's not what it seems." Jake, confused, asked, "What do you mean?" The old man glanced around nervously before continuing. "This house has a history. Many who enter never leave. It feeds on fear, traps souls. Please, get out while you can." Before they could ask more, the man turned and disappeared into the night. The trio stood in stunned silence, the old man's words hanging heavy in the air. Despite the old man's warning, the friends decided to stay, convincing themselves he was just a superstitious local. However, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly oppressive. The walls seemed to close in, and the air felt thick with an unspoken dread. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. This time, all three heard them. They gathered in the living room, fear etched on their faces. "What is happening?" Laura whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Jake replied, trying to stay calm. "But we need to stay together." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a cold breeze swept through the room. The whispers turned into anguished screams, and the front door slammed shut, locking them inside. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. The house seemed to come alive, the walls pulsating as if breathing. Shadows danced across the room, forming grotesque shapes that taunted them. Emily felt the pull towards the basement again. She knew the answers lay there, but the thought of facing that mirror once more filled her with dread. Yet, she also knew they had no choice. "We have to go back to the basement," she said, her voice firm despite the fear. Jake and Laura hesitated but nodded, trusting Emily's instincts. They descended the stairs together, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The basement was as cold and eerie as before. The mirror stood in the center, its surface now glowing with an unnatural light. Emily approached it cautiously, the whispers guiding her. As she looked into the mirror, her twisted reflection reappeared, but this time, it spoke directly to her friends. "Welcome," it sneered. "You are all mine now." The room plunged into darkness, the only light emanating from the cursed mirror. The trio huddled together, their fear palpable. "We need to destroy it," Jake said, his voice resolute. "It's the source of all this." Emily nodded, though uncertainty filled her. She picked up a heavy metal rod lying nearby and swung it at the mirror with all her strength. The glass shattered, and an ear-piercing scream filled the room. A blinding light enveloped them, and they were thrown back by an unseen force. When they awoke, the house was silent. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the whispers were gone. They stumbled out of the basement, their bodies aching but relieved to be free. The front door was unlocked, and they rushed outside, breathing in the fresh air with gratitude. As they looked back at the house, it seemed to shrink and fade, becoming a mere shadow of its former self. The old man appeared again, his expression one of relief and sorrow. "You did it," he said. "You broke the curse." "What happened here?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. The man sighed, his eyes filled with regret. "The house was built on cursed land. It trapped souls, feeding on their fear. Many tried to escape, but none succeeded until now." He handed Emily a small, worn journal. "This contains the history of the house. Learn from it, and ensure no one else falls victim." With that, he walked away, disappearing into the horizon. The trio stood in silence, the weight of their ordeal settling upon them. They drove away, leaving the haunted house behind. Though they were free, the memories of that night would haunt them forever. The White House stood as a grim reminder of the horrors they had faced, a silent sentinel in the heart of Texas.